Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to start by thanking Deborah for inviting me. I did not come from sunny weather and 14 degrees. It's still the height of winter in Whitehorse, so I'm thrilled to be here. And if you weren't thrilled to have someone from Toronto come and tell you how you should do it, I know that you're waiting with bated breath for someone from Whitehorse to tell you how it should be done. And I wish I could tell you we have all of the answers. We don't. We have all the same questions. And we have a lot of different things that we have been trying because we've recognized that what's happened in the past hasn't worked, hasn't had the impact that we've wanted it to have. I'm going to give you a little snapshot of the Yukon so you have a sense of where I'm coming from. We are a territory of 35,000 people, period. There are 26,000 people in Whitehorse. The rest are scattered in 14 communities around the territory. We sit in those 14 communities regularly. But we also sit, obviously, in Whitehorse. And every time I come and I hear someone like Jonathan speak about something like the Gladue court, I think, I want that. Or the community court in Vancouver, ooh, I want that. Or the drug treatment court in Toronto or anywhere else. The reality is we'll never have that. We are not big enough. We don't have the resources, and we don't have the offender population in any one given area to justify or support it. So the question is, if you're trying to make something like Gladue real, how do you do that when you don't have the same options, when you don't have the same resources that you can draw from? And I think the starting point has to be looking back. What have we done? What do we normally do? What works and what doesn't? And as Jonathan pointed out, there's not a lot of information that you get in a regular sentencing. There's almost a script to it. You get someone's CV, basically. This is where they went to school. This is where they've worked. Are they working now? They've got 2 kids. It doesn't tell you anything meaningful about the person that is in front of you, and you very rarely hear from them. We then go to our menu of sentencing options, and we figure out where to plug them in based on that CV that we've got. And then we go on to the next one. And I think at the end of the day, there has to be a recognition that that there's a real danger in taking something that should be a real individualized and human process and making it a very mechanical one. That sausage factory that Jonathan was talking about. So that's what we've done. Has it worked? No. We have overrepresentation of First Nations people in our system as well. We have a 25% Aboriginal population. Probably 80% of the people that I see are First Nations. So we have the same problem that you see everywhere in Canada. All of those responses, that menu, hasn't made any difference. So how is it that we do something differently? And I think that the way to avoid that danger of making this a very mechanical process is to look at 2 main things. The first thing is information. Because if all you get is that CV or the 2 pieces of paper that Jonathan's talking about, you know nothing about that person in a way that you can respond meaningfully at all. And for the young man that was asking about those people that come before us that are disadvantaged, that are not First Nations, that's the same across the board. We need the people that are in front of us to be real. We need to recognize these are real individuals with real histories, real backgrounds, real problems. And we need to understand who they are if we're going to respond in any meaningful way. So the first thing you need is that information. How do you get it? Well, I'm going to talk about the projects, some of the projects that we have that are going, which have that component of trying to expand the knowledge base and the information sources that we have for the offenders that are in front of us. The second main area that I think you need to focus on in trying to respond to the problems that we're seeing is being more creative and open-minded about our responses, not having that menu, not saying this is where this person fits in this grid of sentencing, but being open-minded, creative. But beyond that, I think we have to recognize that we can't do it alone. Sandra was talking about the need for there to be a group response. And I think all of the approaches that we have that I feel are making some sort of difference in what we're seeing, particularly with First Nation offenders before us, are the ones that are group problem-solving approaches. as a judge, I've been sitting for 7 years now. In my mind, as a non-First Nation person, it would be absolutely ludicrous for me to walk into a courtroom and tell a First Nation offender what I think is going to make a difference for them. How do I understand their experience? So I have to have those sources of information that help me understand that experience, and I have to have others that are involved in the process in a way that they can help me understand that experience, but it can also help me understand what responses might make a difference for that individual. What would make this process relevant for them? Because that's beyond my experience. And I have to recognize that. I can't go into the courtroom and say that I know everything. I try, but normally I'm unsuccessful. So starting point is recognizing that it's bigger than me. It's bigger than the courtroom that I preside in. It has to include a larger sector of the community, and particularly has to include the First Nations that are involved. So in terms of some of the things that we've tried to do that build off of those two things, trying to get additional sources of information, but also trying to have a group problem-solving approach. There's been a number of things that we've tried with varying degrees of success, but I'm going to talk to you about 4 different things. Now, some of these are projects which predate Gladue, some of them post-date Gladue. All of them, though, in my view, have, as part of their goal, the spirit of Gladue. Now, the first of those is circle sentencing. Is there anybody here that's ever been involved in a circle before? 1 or 2? Do they do the circle sentencing in Manitoba? Infrequently. Okay. Well, the first circles actually in Canada that were done in the Yukon, believe it or not. A place that was once described on the American news as a remote Canadian outpost. But they did start circles sitting there. Judge Barry Stewart worked very closely with some of the local First Nations in terms of developing the process as it became in the Yukon, in any event. So, I need some water. The problem with talking too much is you get dry mouth. Okay, so circle sentencing is it's an alternative sentencing approach that's based on restorative justice principles. We reconfigure the courtroom into an actual circle. It's very, very heavily community involved. In fact, it's the community itself that drives the circle. It's the community that sets up the request for it. It's the community that works with the particular offender extensively before the actual circle happens. It's the community that sets the rules and the guidelines for the circle. And they're different. They differ from community to community, but at their root, they're about respect. They're about respect for others within the circle, and it's about sharing of information within that community in a way that we try and get to know the individual that we're dealing with and what options there are within that community, as opposed to jail, for us to look at that involve the community. Because most of the responses that come out of a circle, most of the sentences, have a lot of community involvement as well. So when we go into the circle, it generally will start with a prayer and a smudge. Some of depending on the community, it will reflect their particular traditions. But then we go around the circle several times. They can take a long, long period of time to do circles depending on the community, the individual, what the issues are that we're trying to grapple with. And at the end of the day, the community, the circle will make recommendations to me in sentencing. It's really a group problem-solving approach from the point of view that it's rare that you see a sentence other than what's recommended by the community. There is, and I'm sure maybe even some of you in this room have this viewpoint, But there is a general view that circle sentencing is about someone getting off easy. And I can tell you from my experience, people that we see, a lot of them, they spend a lot of time in jail. Jail is not tough for them. It's not hard for them to do. But a circle, when they're accountable to their community, that community that is going to see them every day, that's going to be holding them accountable, is significantly more difficult for them to do than it is to go to jail for a few months. The other thing that I think is interesting to note about circles is most communities in a circle will recommend much more in terms of sentence, conditions, and other mechanisms for them to be held accountable than I would ever have ordered on my own. So it isn't an easy way out. Now, the difficulty that we are finding with circles is they are heavily community dependent, and there's already been reference today to issues with respect to capacity. And I think you see that in a number of First Nations, and we certainly see it. There's a high level of burnout with individuals that are heavily involved in this area, and they just find they're not able to continue on. Then we're not doing so many circles because the demand is there for them. But then someone else comes along and we start to do them again. But there's a real need for us to look at how we build capacity within communities. And that's beyond me today in terms of answering. But I think a circle is a process which has that ability to increase the information that you have upon which to sentence, but also to increase the options that are available. I think I'm probably getting close to out of time, so I'm going to skip one of the ones I was going to talk about. And I'm going to tell you about one of our communities, Teslin. Teslin is a community of about 450 people that is about 2 hours outside of Whitehorse. And the interesting thing about Teslin is, again, most of what's happened there has been driven by the First Nation itself. In the Yukon, most of our First Nations are self-governing First Nations. We don't have reserves. So the dynamics are somewhat different. But Teslin has probably been in the lead in really wanting to take control of administration of justice issues in their own community. Because it's a little like someone from Ottawa coming up to Whitehorse to tell us how to do it, when I'm coming from Whitehorse into Teslin to tell them how to do it. So what has been developed in Teslin is, firstly, they have what they call their Peacemakers Court. And any matters that they are interested in taking on can be diverted right out of the regular court system into Peacemakers Court. They're dealt with by the community. There is no involvement from me, or the lawyers for that matter. The other thing that we do in Teslin's governance is based on a clan system. They are a Tlingit community, 5 clans. So there are 5 clan leaders. And there are a number of traditions that flow from that, not the least of which is that what one offender does shames their entire clan, but their clan is responsible to the other clan, or whoever is on the other side of this particular issue. So the way we set it up in Teslin is I actually sit with the 5 clan leaders, and they actually sit at the head of the courtroom, and I sit to the side. And they will make recommendations to me on sentencing. They will provide me information about the offenders. I will get information from the general community as well. But they will also make recommendations to me on sentencing. They will also address the offenders themselves. It's always the clan leader of the offender's clan that starts. And I can tell you that I could stand there and say exactly the same things. It's not going to have the same impact, right? It's a little like, when it's your child and you're reading them the Riot Act, it's a different impact than if somebody else says something to them, because of the relationship, because of the dynamic. So I think it's important to recognize that because of that process of involving them actively in the process, there are needs that are met in the process that we cannot otherwise meet, that we can't meet in the regular justice system. And I was giving Deborah an example that of a case that I had done in Teslin. It involved an impaired causing bodily harm. Two formerly best friends from the two largest clans in the community. And one of them, after a drunken party, had hit the other in an ATV and had put him in the hospital, and they'd actually told his family that they didn't think he was going to make it. So when I was doing the sentencing, the victim's mom spoke to me, and she said one of the biggest problems she had, because the justice system had taken so long for us to get to the point that we were sentencing, one of the biggest problems she had was that nobody from the offender's family had ever apologized. And that was an expectation in their community. No one had come forward and said, we're sorry. And how do we make this right? And when I turned to the clan leaders and asked if they had anything that they wanted to say, the clan leader from the offender's clan stood up, did not address me. He turned to the victim's mother, and he began addressing her in Tlingit, in their native tongue. And then another person stood up and faced the victim's family, and another, and another, and another, till every member of the victim's or the offender's clan that was there was standing and facing the offender's family the victim's family, while the clan leader apologized for that, for the behavior and what had happened. Now, it was clear to me that was happening. I mean, I've only got a few words of Tlingit, so I didn't get all of it, but it was evident to me that that's what was happening. And you have to ask yourself, when the victim's family left that courtroom with that apology, would it have had the same impact if I had ordered the offender to apologize? I tend to think it doesn't have a lot of impact if the court orders you to say you're sorry. So in a real way, I think changing the way we do business can change outcomes for everyone in a way that what we've done in the past has not been successful at doing. Okay, got 5 minutes. Okay, the last thing I want to talk to you about is our wellness court. This is one of those situations, as Jonathan pointed out, where a judge can say, I want to set up a specialized court. And that's what I did. But I did not do it alone. Again, it's a group approach. We have a steering committee that includes a number of stakeholders, including First Nations and CYFN. It is not a First Nation specific project, but probably 60 to 70% of our participants are First Nations in this particular court right now. As I said earlier, we didn't have the offender population to support a drug treatment court or a mental health court or an FASD court. So what we did was set up a court to deal with all of them. We take anyone in this process who's got an addiction to drugs and or alcohol, who has a mental health problem, and who may be suffering from a cognitive impairment such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder or any combination thereof, and that encompasses probably 95% of who we see. It doesn't mean everybody opts in, but it does encompass the larger percentage of the people that we are seeing before the courts. What happens is they come into the process, and we develop for each individual, an individualized wellness plan. There is a separate sort of individualized treatment and support team for everyone that comes through. So if they are First Nations, their First Nation is contacted and they're involved in what goes on in terms of the planning for this particular person's wellness journey. We make every effort to have culturally appropriate programming. So one of the drug and alcohol addiction programs that's offered is the White Bison program for the First Nations offenders that we have. There are talking circles and healing circles available as and when they can be organized and are appropriate. And the individual follows their wellness plan for probably anywhere from 18 to 24 months. They come in routinely into the court for check-ins, and I hear how they're doing. When I see the wellness plan, it actually includes a lot of those Gladue elements in terms of I get to start the whole process with that information about who they are and their background. And then I get to see them every 2 to 4 weeks for a couple of years. So by the end of it, you know who they are. They know who you are. And in fact, I have a lot of them that will stop me on the street and tell me how they're doing. So we have informal check-ins in between as well. Small town, you know. You can't go very far without tripping over somebody you've sent to jail. So at its focus, the process starts with information. It starts with understanding who they are. It starts with trying to develop a response that meets their needs, that speaks not just to the treatment that they need, but the supports they need to be successful. It recognizes, for instance, that if you are trying to remain sober and you're living in a household with a partner who's actively using, your chances are slim to nil. So we got to look at housing. We have to look at supports and resources. If you've got kids and you can't get daycare, you can't make it to treatment. So it's not a perfect process. We continue to try and develop the options that we have available in it. They've just opened a wellness center that co-locates a lot of the resources and treatment and programming for them, and that they can drop into and get lunch, can get support from other participants in the program, and get information on other resources and things that they need to make it through successfully. So it's not limited to First Nation offenders, but where the individual is a First Nation member, then that becomes part of their wellness plan. And it becomes informed by them and by their First Nation in a way that hopefully it will be a more meaningful and relevant response to them and to their needs. So those are some of the... Oh, I wanted to say one thing. Jonathan was talking about most judges will tell you that it's more rewarding to sit in a specialized court. And I want to confirm that that is in fact the case. But one of our participants, a young woman that went through wellness court successfully, now has all of her children back, has been drug-free for 3.5 years now, is employed, has a management position now at a local business, sent me a Christmas gift. And on that, with the Christmas gift was a little card where she said, "Thank you for giving me another chance at life." So that's a whole lot different than sitting in a docket where I got 15 minutes to sentence this person, next, next, next. They walk out of that courtroom, I have no idea what happens to them. So it is more reward. And at the end of the day, I think it has more of an impact on the individuals that are involved, the people that work in the courts, but also the offenders and the victims that are connected to the process as well. And I think ultimately for the community. And that's what we're trying to do. You're trying to develop processes that ultimately will help people to change, as opposed to simply warehousing them in jail. So there's two final points that I really wanted to stress. And I think one of the things Deborah said that I think that is really correct about this, it's about mindset. It's not about doing something because Supreme Court of Canada tells you that you have to. It's about the way that you think and being open to learn from others and working together with others to make a difference. The last thing I want to say is there is no project, there is no response that is going to be a panacea that's going to magically transform and fix everything. So part of what you have to do is redefine what success is. And for some of the people we see, success may be no more than the fact that if they're in wellness court, they're not offending substantively for the period of time they're with us. For some of them, that might be the most that we get. But then we take them back the next time, and we've got another period of time where they're not offending. They may be breaching here and there, but they're not substantively offending. So you have to redefine success so that it's consistent with what the offenders that are before you are capable of doing. It has to be, success has to be related to who they are, not to who I am. Thank you.